This is 1390
You're listening to
a.m.
NewsHour from the BBC with me, Gary O'Donoghue. Now, in Venezuela, the US
They just did
State
a special
Department is urging
report
all
for
US citizens
Bob
to
Weir, and I missed
immediately
it.
leave the country. It said there were reports of armed militias setting up roadblocks and
Oh, it sounds like
searching
Trump's in
vehicles for
control.
Americans. It comes as both the US and Venezuela have said they were
Traitor.
exploring the possibility of restoring diplomatic relations, with a Trump administration delegation visiting the South
We've
American
got to
nation
stop
on
Trump, dude.
Friday.
He's making
A
everything worse
small team of
everywhere.
US diplomats and a security detail traveled to Venezuela to make a preliminary assessment about the potential reopening of the US embassy in Caracas. Meanwhile, questions remain about the Trump administration's commitment to restoring democracy in Venezuela
Zero
after a
commitment. There's no
long
question.
number. And there are a number of other thorny issues also on the agenda, such as the release of political prisoners. Professor Ricardo Hausmann is a former Minister of Planning in Venezuela, now at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So what does he make of the latest developments and attempts to re-establish diplomatic
It was nice how
relations?
the guy giving a
Well,
tribute to
there
Bob
are
Weir said
many
that
things
in the Grateful
happening, and
Dead,
some of them
everybody in the room
are
was in the Grateful
positive,
Dead.
and others are more sources of concern. On the one hand, the bad dictator is gone. On
And
the
they're
other
masters
hand,
of improvisation because they listen to each other.
actors in the cartel of the Suns are the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Interior Affairs, in control of the militias that are stopping people, Americans and people who might
I
support the
thought Trump
U.S.
was in control. He's getting Americans killed down there. That's your traitor, Nazi, fascist Fuhrer.
to
See any strategy from the Trump administration here? Because on the one hand, we hear
No, there's no
one moment they talk
strategy. He's
about
just doing shit for
exploiting the
Putin. He's
oil,
going to put
and some other
concentration
times we
camps
hear
down there to
talk
put us
about
in.
controlling immigration. Other times we hear talk about restoring democracy. Do you see any coherence?
Well, I think that they've
Just the
mentioned
fact that you
oil
have to
many
ask.
times, but the oil industry, the oil companies that met with President Trump on Friday, told him in quite clear ways that you have to restore the rule of law in order
Yeah, they want
for
nothing to
the
do with it.
conditions to be there for an investment in oil.
Trump's too
That is
unstable.
part of the strategy of the Trump administration is to say we recover oil and then we will
Trump's
talk
control
about
has
the
resulted in
rule of law
Americans
and
getting killed
democracy
down
later
there.
on. But the companies have to invest heavily in order to have a future cash
Hey, look, a
flow,
Nazi in the
but
comments.
they don't trust that the future is going to be what they signed today. So they need to have a credible government, a legitimate change in the laws of hydrocarbon production for them to be willing to invest. So my argument would be put democracy first, put the political transition first, get these thugs, the Minister of Interior and the Minister of Defense, out of government, either in exile or in jail. But Venezuela has lost 8 million people who have left the country. There is no human capital in the country to recover the economy or to recover the oil industry. Nobody is going to go into Venezuela if you're telling the Americans to leave because you've left these thugs in power.
But there doesn't seem to be any appetite at the moment in Washington to change the regime there beyond the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. They have left, obviously, Delcy Rodriguez in power along with the other ministers, and they seem to want to deal with them.
Yeah, but the problem is that they need a country that it sees a future in the current trends, and they need an international oil industry that sees a future. And that's not there now. If you want it to be there now, let's accelerate the transition to democracy.
What do you see as the strategy in terms of the oil? Because the Trump administration also seems to believe this thing could be turned on pretty quickly, but the state of the infrastructure in Venezuela isn't going to allow that, is it? And it's not exactly an easy kind of form of oil to refine.
I don't think the problem is technological. I think the problem is institutional. The current law says that the only one that can produce oil in Venezuela is the national oil company PDVSA. And PDVSA can have a joint venture with where it holds 51% of the shares. And that royalties have to be 30% and the income tax rate has to be 50%. And under those conditions, nobody's willing to partner with PDVSA, which is broke, which is in default on its debt, which has a bunch of judgments against them, so their assets can be attached by a court and given to former creditors. So it's not a partner that they can deal with. And to change the law, to change the conditions, you need an act of the National Assembly, and the National Assembly is not recognized. The National Assembly was stolen in an election. So no one is going to think that that National Assembly is legitimate in changing hydrocarbons law. And that's what the oil companies are going to say. You know, the future National Assembly is going to say this was a change done under duress.
Like women.
It was not done with the will of the people behind it. So it's the institutional obstacle to recovery that is the binding constraint right now. It's not
I'm
technology.
going to go ahead and curse all the Trump Putiners in chat. Curse Trump and Putin and Netanyahu through you.
To me a little earlier, where we're staying in the region.
So y'all
because
did some good in your lives against
said that
Putin's will.
Venezuelan oil will no longer flow to Cuba, its neighbor and ally.
He's going to try to collapse another country and take that one. He's going to take Greenland.
He urged the Cuban
he's going to keep taking
to
Russia
make a
from the
deal
west
before
while
it is, as he put it,
his
too late.
daddy Vladdy
Cuba
Putin
is
takes
in the
it from
midst
the
of a fuel
east.
and energy crisis, with the island
If you let him.
by rolling blackouts and energy shortages, rather. Venezuela has supplied its ally with an estimated 35,000 barrels of oil a day, making it by far Cuba's largest energy partner. In exchange,
Poor
it's believed that
genocidal
Havana is provided President Nicolas Maduro with his security detail before he was arrested and taken to the United States.
I know you're
Cuba's
all Nazis because
Miguel
it hurts your
Diaz-Canel
feelings to have somebody tell you what you are.
hit back on a presidential.
I called you Nazis. I said I cursed the Nazis in chat. You all whined about it. You're fucking Nazis. Called you, you dumb fucks.
Those who turn everything into a business, even human lives, have no moral authority to point fingers at Cuba for anything. Absolutely.
I'll point fingers at you fucking Nazis, though.
Those who stay hysterically
Fuck
rail
you,
against
Nazi
our
pieces
nation
of shit.
do so out of rage over the sovereign decision of this
Fuck
people
you, Nazi
to
Trump
choose their
Putiners.
political model.
The words there of the Cuban president. Well, Michael Bustamante is chair of Cuban studies at the University of Miami and joins me now on the line. Is Cuba dependent on Venezuela, Professor Bustamante, for its oil?
Certainly, if you look over the last, 20 plus years, yes, the answer is yes. You mentioned in your lead-in that Venezuela lately has been supplying Cuba something on the order of 30,000 barrels a day. That is significantly less than it did at the height. At the height,
yeah, fuck
Venezuela
Trump.
was supplying
Trump's the
over
worst.
100,000 barrels of oil a day, and Cuba was exclusively practically dependent on Venezuela for its imported supplies of oil. That matrix has changed. Cuba is now getting oil from Mexico, from Russia, from a few other places, but make no mistake, removing the Venezuelan supply, which is the most consistent supply, is going to do significant further damage to an economy that's already in crisis.
So do you think this is a realistic threat from the president?
In terms of cutting off the oil supply, yes, I do.
Fuck you, Nazis. I curse you all. I curse Trump and Putin and Netanyahu through you. If you're not a Nazi, you're cool. See you next time.
There was a naval blockade that was declared. I think it's an open question sort of how the Trump administration handled